story takes place in a very intricate part of Chicago history.
Like Confidential meets The Departed.
How the people of Chicago came together and just rose up against adversity. They said, we'll not stand for this.
Help us find these guys. And he says, if I knew who was doing this, I'd tell you. I says, why is that? He says, because we don't rob from the dead.
When I first met Johnny, I was filming something else with a friend of mine, and Johnny happened to be there because he was in support of the guy that I was filming.
And get to talking to Al and finding out more about him and him finding out more about me, and I started to tell him about my story.
And then all of a sudden he starts kind of talking about this story. And I'm sitting there listening, and I remember distinctly there was a pause between our conversation. And I remember saying, no, continue, tell me more.
Well, he asked me if I had anything in writing on it, and I said, yes, I got a summary of it. And I sent it to him, and he liked it a lot.
Apparently there were other people who wanted to get involved to make this story happen for a long time.
He asked me if I had anything besides in writing the story, and I said, yes, I got a great scrapbook that I've kept all my life with the actual pictures from the crime scene, as well as the newspaper clippings from the event.
One day, Al Morrow showed it to me. He said, this is what we're doing, this is what's next. And down he set this thick binder. It must have weighed a ton, and it was about like 5 inches thick, and it just instantly I wanted to know, what is that, what's inside there? I need to know right away.
This is my scrapbook. It's a chronological history of my career on the police department in Chicago, starting in July 11th of 1966.
I opened it and turned page by page. I just became so invested and involved in this story, in John's story. All these photos and notes, and just the whole history that was there. I mean, you could see it in the Age newsprint.
Al and Kurt and myself, we wrote the screenplay. They wrote it. I just gave them the technical advice as to what verbiage to use, because you talk differently. Chicago police talk differently than New York police, so we want to make it accurate.
The fact that it was based on a true story, it was something I really wanted to dive into.
This was headline news. This was a major case in the city of Chicago.
And these are people that were victimized. These were people that, imagine your loved one passing away, and you go to their funeral, and then you go home and find your place is completely ransacked. And these guys are just kind of laughing and living off the stuff they stole from you.
You hear about it, and then you kind of think, wow, people really sunk that low to do something of that caliber.
I mean, you're talking about the police departments, the mothers and daughters on the streets, everybody just kind of banded together and realized that these two criminals need to be stopped.
So these guys were pissing off the mob. They were making everybody upset with them. Everybody wanted to take them down, including the Chicago Police Department, and that's where Johnny and his partner come into play.
The funerals that would actually list the people's home address and their phone number so other people could call them and give them their condolences. Well, this is how the burglars were doing. They were reading the obituaries and having the phone number, and then we figured out that they were calling before coming to the house.
Robbing from the dead, as it were, and it's just the mix of that with kind of the home life and how that can probably take a toll on John and his partner was just fascinating to me.
We had fake funerals set up with the funeral homes.
How do you deal with two losses in one day? You know, how do you deal with Johnny going out and trying to catch these guys, and then the wife being left alone a lot, worried that will these people retaliate on her family, on her son?
This story is not even just about the case. It's about how this case affects everyone in the story.
It had a tremendous impact on the city of Chicago because, again, it was in the newspapers constantly, and we were catching a lot of, heat from it, why we couldn't solve this case.
Bitter End was a nightclub in Chicago.
It had a clientele of a lot of mafia people. A lot of wannabe mafia people that wanted to be made guys, wise guys, etc.
No longer there. I guess it burned down to the ground. And so we're very lucky to have John, who was able to kind of point it out to us and tell us exactly where it was, what went on in that place.
It was a real jumping place. And we went there for one reason and one reason only, to try and get tips and clues on who was doing these burglaries.
Well, the screenwriting process was pretty interesting. It was a good collaboration between Al and I.
Visually, I could see this. I could see the colors, or at least the shades, and how people reacted to different things in classic 1968 Chicago. How would we want to present that on film that hasn't been done before?
We especially considered the two different home lives that John had with his wife and Frank, who was our antagonist, and his home life. How they are just a very strong dichotomy, how they were just polar opposites.
Very relatable now, because you still see these things happening today. Not specifically this case, because you don't see this horrific burglaries all the time like this, but you do see the relationships in domestic households like this, where they are at different extremes, with a family that's very loving and then also very bad.
Dichotomy between the main leads of the film and the protagonist and the antagonist, how their shades of personalities just clash.
This is a story that has scope, as well it should. That's how it was in reality, and that's how we wanted to portray it.
I think the other theme of this movie is life and death.
The police didn't have radios on their person. They actually they were built into the console of the car. So there's an interesting moment where they actually had to just flip by a coin toss. They decide who has to stay with the patrol car and who goes in to possibly face a life-threatening situation.
This is the front page of the Chicago Sun-Times the next morning after my partner and I solved the case and shot the burglar.
Why The Bitter End hasn't gotten made, honestly, is I think because it's such a unique story.
That one program, there are 8 million stories in the naked city, and this is one of them,
John, realized that he had something here and was waiting until the right kind of moment came up and he met the right people, and I'm very fortunate that initially was Al, and Al in turn considered me to co-write the script with him.
Me and Kurt and everybody is trying to rise up to try to make this into something really unique.
But when this case was solved, it relieved a lot of pressure off the police department, off the city itself, and it made a lot of people in their neighborhoods very comfortable knowing that there was an end to this story. And in fact, to the best of my knowledge, there has never been another obituary burglary in the city of Chicago since.